Dr. Bach, the English Civil War is also termed as the Great Rebellion or the English Revolution. So how do these terms differ in their perspectives or depiction of the same event?
Well, if you call it the Great Rebellion, then that is a pejorative, a negative term.
Negative term.
It assumes that there's no right here to rebel. So it's the kind of it was the kind of term that you would use if you viewed it as illegal. In other words, if you were a prerogative ruler like Charles was, you would see it as a rebellion.
Yes.
It's quite interesting that terming it the English Revolution is something which Marxist historians insisted upon, because the word English Revolution was first actually applied not to 1649, but to 1688. In 1688 is when James flees and there's a new settlement between the monarchy and Parliament, which limits significantly the power of the monarch. But Marxist historians thought that it was the much more significant was what happened in the 1640s. So the word revolution, the English Revolution, was transferred to there. And among them, one of the important historians, Christopher Hill, who wrote an important textbook about the English Revolution. So if you regard it as a revolution, then you see it as fundamentally changing the constitutional practices in England. And of course, the English Revolution is followed by the Restoration in 1660.
Yes.
So there is a sense in which Englishmen turn their backs on what had happened in the 1640s and 50s. And to some extent that is true. They saw the 1650s as a period of military dictatorship and puritanical rule. And when Charles II returned in 1660, it would have been possible to say that things had the clock had been put back to 1642, but it hadn't really. I think that in actual terms, Charles was always aware that what happened to his father could happen to him. James was certainly aware of that at the end of his reign when he fled England because he feared that he was going to end up as his father had done. And so I think the English Revolution makes its mark. But the Restoration means that England in practice follows a path of evolution in its constitutional development rather than as, say, in America or in France or in Russia or in China or in Iran. It doesn't absolutely remove completely what had been there and replace it with something new. The Restoration means that the path of evolution rather than revolution is restored.
Yeah, so you think that the word revolution might be too radical and you prefer evolution.
It's not too radical for what happened at the time, but it's not a revolution which was sustained in full. The 1650s end with a return to, in theory, prerogative monarchy.
Yes, situated in the whole period.
If you're looking at the period as a whole. And if you want to turn to where the really big changes in terms of the limitations of royal power come, I think that the 1688 revolution and the means of financing the monarchy and government policy once the Bank of England is set up, those are the places to look there for significant evolutionary change.
Okay, understand. So, a very related question. So, how do you view the civil wars in the broader context of the European history?
Well, some historians have argued that there was a general crisis in Europe in the 1640s and 50s. And there's something to be said for this. I mean, in Spain, for example, the king's great minister Olivares fell following the rebellion of the Catalans against the Spanish monarchy, and the Portuguese in 1640 broke free from Spain, which they'd been incorporated into in 1580. And in France, there was the Fronde in the early 1650s, which was quite a minor rebellion, really, against the French monarchy.
Okay.
But the French monarchy had been established on very firm foundations by the minister of Louis XIII,
Yes.
Cardinal Richelieu.
Yes.
And I think in both France and Spain, the powers of the monarch remain very, very strong.
Yes.
And so there is a contrast here, I think,
Okay.
with England. In England, there is a tradition of articulate free speech in Parliament, and Parliament is regularly called. The sources of revenue that the king has often depend,
Yes.
not totally, but they often depend upon
Yes.
Parliament and parliamentary grant. And in Parliament, there is always the possibility of dissent with the king's religious policy
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
So I think if you contrast England and Europe, the path that England takes is very different. You get much more significant constitutional and political change by 1714 than you see in either France or in Spain, the other two great powers. And indeed, to end on that note, I mean, if you go into the 18th century, one of the great French thinkers is Voltaire.
Yes.
And he wrote one of his early works is his Lettres Anglaises, his English letters, and he looks at England as a model of what he, as an advanced Enlightenment thinker, would like to see France be, a country where there is limited monarchy and a degree of religious toleration. And so for that, in that work and in that time, advanced French thinkers looked on England as the ideal model,
The model.
that they would like to see come about in France.
Yes. Can I say that Britain walks ahead in the political system in Europe and in the whole world?
Well, if you regard Western-style democracy as, for Europe, the way forward, then certainly yes, I think England is more advanced than any other country in Europe. I mean, one of the most striking contrasts is in 1685 in France, the king expels those who are not Catholic. Protestants are expelled from France and they go to Switzerland, it becomes Germany, the Netherlands, Britain, and bring with them a tremendous amount of Protestant work ethic, which benefits our economies. By contrast, in England, 4 years later, you have parliamentary acts of toleration, which allow those who are Protestant but don't accept the king as the head of the church to worship freely as long as they have a license. And this is a very, very striking contrast.
Yeah, it's a very sharp contrast. That's very interesting. It's very distinctive. Thank you very much, Dr. Bach.